Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the meeting number 3 for 2025, Wednesday, May the 14th. We have one project that we're going to be reviewing this afternoon. I'll come back to that in a moment, but we'll first start with land acknowledgement by Christina.
Thank you, Gord. Let's wait for the slide to come through. I'll go ahead without the slide.
Yeah, sure.
That's fine. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and is within the territory of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty.
Thank you very much. Before we get started, I thought since we have a hybrid meeting here today, that the people on the screen should know who everybody is around the table. So I'll start with Christina. Just identify yourself. If you're from the city, panel, consultant, and just make our way around the table.
I'm Christina Rangers. I'm a program manager in urban design with the City of Toronto.
I'm Michael Eckman. I'm co-chairs of the City of Toronto Design Review Panel.
I'm Heather Rolston. I'm architect and a principal at EDP Quadrangle and a panel member.
Jim Goff, Paul Colleague, panel member, but today acting as consultant, urban design principal at Perkins and Will, working with a team that includes WSP, probably others I should remember. And
I'm Emma UVT at Perkins and Will consultant.
I'm Stephen Gardner. I'm a senior planner with Development Review Division at the City of Toronto and one of the co-leads on the North York Center study.
Donna Newman, senior planner with strategic initiatives and city planning at the City of Toronto, and also one of the co-leads on the study.
Shannon Lee, senior urban designer in Northfield District. I'm the urban design lead for the study from City of Toronto.
Thank you. Gordon Stratford, chair for this session today, part of the panel.
Yes, Maria, urban designer and working as a DRP coordinator.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, there are 2 panel members, I think, that are on the, they're joining remotely. I see Eladia and Joe. Have I missed anybody? And I think some of the images that I'm seeing up there are already down here, so it's fine. Good to go. Okay, the North York at the Center is our project today. Thank you for joining us. In the ether and here. This is a study in city area review. It's the second review for North York on Center. We've set aside 1 hour and 35 minutes for the session we're going to have today. There will be no vote at the end. There will certainly be opportunity for comments, questions, and comments as well. Staff will have 5 minutes for their presentation, and then we'll follow with a 25-minute presentation for the consultant team. And each case at the 1 minute mark before the end of the 5 and 25, I'll just gently tell you have time. And what I'm going to do right now, before I call roll call, is remind everybody that we're live streaming on YouTube. It's also being recorded, and the recordings will be available on the City Planning YouTube channel following the meeting. So what I'm going to do now, excuse me, is I'm going to do panel member roll call. And if you can answer when I ask, when I say your name, just let me know you're here and whether you have any conflict of interest. And I will start with Meg.
Present, no conflict.
Thank you.
You're in no conflict.
Michael?
Present, no conflict.
Jim? Jason? Thank you. Lydia?
Present and no conflict.
Thanks, Lydia. And Joe?
You're in no conflict.
Okay, I think I've got everybody. So we will start with the then we'll move into the city presentation as soon as it's up on the screen. We're ready to go. Okay, you have 5 minutes from the mark. I'll call the minute.
Sure, thank you. So thank you for having us here today. I'm going to start off by sharing a brief introduction to the project and an overview of the work completed to date as context for a consultant's presentation on an emerging preferred option for North York Center and how to manage growth and change in that area. We'll focus on the big moves for public realm and built form. Next slide. So yeah, we'll move through those items. So beginning with some context, North York Center is one of 4 centers identified in the City of Toronto's official plan as a focus for growth, and it is served by both the Yonge and Sheppard subway lines. Given its location in proximity to higher order transit, our study area includes 3 major transit station areas where high density development in particular is directed. The existing North York secondary plan was first adopted back in 1997, and it established a vision for creating a downtown for North York. That vision has largely been achieved through significant growth and development over the last 25 years. But development pressure continues today because North York Center is an attractive place to live and work. So in this context, the vision and planning framework for North York at the center is being updated to provide a plan for how the center should continue to grow over the coming decades, as well as to identify updates that are needed to bring the plan into conformity with provincial planning policy, which has evolved over the last 25 years. The study area encompasses the existing secondary plan area that's shown in red on the screen, running along Yonge Street, primarily from Highway 401 in the south to Drury Avenue and Cummer Avenue in the north. And we're also looking at boundary expansion study areas around the 3 PMTSAs. Since the current secondary plan boundary does not capture a 10-minute walk within 10-minute walk of the subway stations. As a comprehensive review of the secondary plan, the study includes many components highlighted on this slide, and today we'll be zeroing in on elements related to community design and welcoming your feedback. We also want to acknowledge that the transportation component for this project is quite scoped to local improvements that are focused on elements that can complement other major projects that are already underway and that will reshape the mobility network in the center. These projects include Transform Yonge, the Dorset and Beecroft extensions, the Highway 401 interchange EA, the Yonge North subway extension, and a new connection along the Finch Hydro Corridor Trail. Finally, we also want to reiterate that the focus is on developing a refreshed set of planning policies for the center. And as a policy project, our scope does not include directly advancing any specific capital projects, though our work can inform future projects that may be advanced by other divisions, agencies, or private developers in the future. In terms of the project approach, the project is being initiated or undertaken in 3 phases. The first phase was completed last year and included a background review of the existing and planned conditions in the center. We're now well into phase 2, which is focused on developing and evaluating options for how the center should grow and change. And we expect to complete phase 2 this fall with a report to council with our recommendations. Phase 3 is when we'll bring an updated secondary plan to council for approval, along with supporting implementation strategy for how to deliver the necessary infrastructure improvements needed to serve growth. Another technical document that will accompany the secondary plan in phase 3 is the functional concept plan, which involve feasibility analysis and 10% design for street improvements to inform future capital works. If adopted by council in phase 3, zoning would be developed in a future phase 4, pending the resolution of any appeals of the secondary plan. Yeah. Community engagement is a key part of each phase of our work. And community engagement in phase 1 was focused on developing a visioning framework for North York Center, which Paul will go over later in the presentation. And in phase 2, we've been focused on sharing and gathering feedback on an emerging preferred option for North York Center, elements of which Paul again will be presenting in his portion today. We've had a great turnout at our public meetings with over 350 attendees at our last meeting series at the end of March, and over 1,000 responses to our most recent online survey. Before turning it over to Shannon Paul, this slide provides a closer look at how we got to where we are today. We just wanted to highlight that there were 3 draft options that aren't being covered today, but they were developed based on issues and opportunities identified in phase 1, and then evaluated against the visioning framework, which helped us to get to an emerging preferred option that we'll share today. And then based on the feedback from yourselves and from the community, we'll subsequently be working towards a preferred option that will form the basis of our recommendation to council in the fall. With that, I'll turn it over to Shannon briefly.
Thanks, Yana. So the first part, I just want to highlight a few questions and areas for the panel to discuss today. So two of the questions are focusing on the public realm and open spaces. First, what are the key considerations in refining the public realm and landscape strategy to create a welcoming, green, and pedestrian-focused experience along Doris Avenue and Big Cross Road? The second one is, what are the design strategies for the streetscape improvement along the east-west connections to preserve the green character while considering the existing and planned context? The third question is about the built form strategy. So the proposed built form strategy for Northwest Center will increase heights for tall buildings along Yonge Street and introduce built form transition within mid-rise buildings to the east and west. So what are the key built form considerations to provide proper transition when introducing the mid-rise buildings in a largely built out area? So now I'll pass it on to Paul.
Great, thank you very much. Paul, as soon as you're set to go, let me know.
Give us a second, maybe while I do that, Joe. If somebody online, Joe or Lady, if you could just give me a wave, am I enunciating? I understand the mic's at the far end of the room. Lady is hearing me. Okay. I think we're good to go.
25 minutes, 20 remarks, so let's do this.
All right. So just very broadly, we wanted to start by saying that, this is a comprehensive planning framework as Yana outlined, and we've completed extensive analysis, auctioneering, and engagement. We're going to try and edit things here. We really tried to focus in on the physical elements, build form, streetscape, public realm, ability, and some of the land use planning exercises, but fear not, there is a kind of entire suite of policy, economic development, and real estate and other considerations that have gone into this. The appendix does include the detailed framework plans that are emerging or represent the emerging preferred, and what we're going to be showing on the screen is a sort of stylized version of that, which tries to abstract things up into, a party diagram of a framework, let's call it. And so we have prescribed this, but are happy to kind of broaden the discussion if questions need to do. So next slide, looking at North York today, it's an incredibly successful mixed-use center. It's grown up around the subway and has the second highest concentrations of offices outside the downtown. It was in fact developed as a mini downtown in the days of Mel Lessman, and is now home to a diverse group of people, very high percentage of new Canadians relative to the average, much bigger focus on working age people. So there's few children, few seniors, things you'd expect in a sort of high-rise neighborhood. It's characterized by a very clear division between the high-density center that you see on the right and then the low-rise neighborhoods that are just outside the urban growth center or secondary plan boundary that are almost exclusively detached houses. The last point is that it's generally built up. There's very few soft sites remaining. There's maybe a dozen sites remaining. And so this update to the secondary plan comes at a key point where we need to kind of reimagine, but potentially expand the area. And so before we took to the future, we just wanted to go a step backwards and start with a little bit of framing and understanding. North York Center itself is the black outline, and it sits at the high ground between the east and the west branches of the Don. So not only does that give you great views of the skyline, it also comes with some wind issues, particularly as we get the northwest winds. It is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat people, and is covered by Treaty 13. But as the engagement with both the Mississaugas of the Credit and local Indigenous, urban Indigenous, has highlighted, there is a lack of information about specific Indigenous history on this site. We know about the history along Humber Valley and other sites further east. And so there was a very clear point that we need to do the necessary surveys to fill in those gaps to kind of inform our moving forward. That said, there was a lot of good feedback about prioritizing and honoring Indigenous connections to the land, and you'll see some work about Woodkip Creek, and then increasing the visibility through Indigenous art, culture, language, and history throughout placemaking, placekeeping opportunities. Over top of that landscape, my transitions did not work, so you're stuck with all of it. What we've got here is the colonial grid from 1860. For all the nerds out there, you know this is exactly 5/4 of a mile, exactly 2 kilometers. So you see Yonge Street down the middle, Bathurst and Bayview on either side of it, Shepherd, Finch, Steeles. And then the blue lines represent the Wilkett Creek and the branches of the East Don. Typically, the land drops off in that sort of diagonal direction. This is all important, not just because of my nerdy obsession, but because those farms were divided, or those concessions were divided into 5 farms. Those farms then got subdivided almost exactly into 4. And so you have a perfect 100-meter grid of 20 blocks between Shepherd and Finch. What that means is you've got a relatively walkable community. Most of the housing dates back to the immediate post-war period, almost all detached housing, and then with the sort of characteristic Main Street buildings along Yonge Street that are set back with the kind of parking pads out front. So it's kind of an emerging early strip mall type condition. That transformed radically in the sort of post-war period, and especially with the introduction of the subway. We saw the kind of young development plan from 1968 that looks to create a complete new downtown, complete with offices, institutional buildings, central library, rec center, and so on. That said, you can still see in blue Wilkett Creek as a kind of vestige of that landscape. And what you see in white are the Doris and Beecroft streets that have really framed the development of the center moving forward. You do see a lot more spillover into the areas outside those white in this model. That didn't necessarily pan through as we move forward. What you do see here is a real focus on the office uses, including some institutional uses like Westwood Square, City Hall, the Rec Center, the Living Arts Center there, or the North York Performing Arts Center. After that, in 1997, you see the secondary plan that we're working on today, or that is being updated currently. This really formalized that kind of split between the neighborhood and the kind of urban growth center. It introduced a lot more residential uses. You see the early images on the left, top left. Predating the tall building guidelines, you have a lot of these wide slabby buildings, but often with a kind of 2-story podium that has some interesting retail, in fact. And then post 2006, a lot more of the kind of typical tower podium buildings throughout. It was paired with a series of public realm guidelines. So there's a very specific 10-meter setback from curb to building face. So you get wide sidewalks throughout this area, but also the kind of deep setbacks on the Doris and Beecroft service roads that act as that kind of comprehensive transition to the neighborhoods. It was wildly successful. The population grew. You can see here more than doubling just from 2000 to 21. That's even higher today. And we're at a point now where this is largely filled out. Recent OLT decisions have basically busted through the height limits and the regime that was in place. And so this study currently looks at a kind of opportunity to kind of reconsider those new precedents and then look at this area in a much more comprehensive fashion. The work we've done, I'm sure you've all clicked on that link and read the 500 and some odd pages of background study. It covers a lot of the sort of typical built form stuff you see here: open space, natural areas, land uses, building types, walkability, etc. But also includes a lot more around demographics, the planning framework, and other elements. And so we do have a kind of comprehensive piece there. One other thing we'd like to sort of do is, before we dive into the nitty-gritty, is do just a real kind of basic physical comparison. We compared North York to Yonge and Egg, the downtown, Scarborough, and some of the other urban centers. And we're just going to walk you through the comparison to Yonge and Eglinton, because it really is just a kind of transposition, 3 or 4 concession blocks south, but it offers some interesting insights. So you can see the grid is largely consistent. The patterns of northwest to southeast ravines are similar, but then it does depart. One thing, the one thing you can't see is that the Yonge and Eglinton Center has a much bigger footprint than North York. It does extend all the way out to Bayview in the east and almost to Bathurst in the west. And so you've got an urban growth center, but then a secondary plan that's much bigger. And so that kind of tweaked us to ideas about how to maybe think about North York in a more comprehensive fashion. The other thing we looked at was the function of Avenue Road and Mount Pleasant, understanding that They serve a kind of complementary function to Yonge Street, aligned with kind of local serving retail. And then notice that Willowdale and to a lesser degree Senlac are at least geographically in that same vicinity in North York, even though from a land use perspective, they're exclusively single family homes for the most part. And then the last thing we sort of tweaked to is sort of Doris Beecroft are parallels in sort of the function of duplex and Red Path at Yonge and Eglinton. These are streets that really line the edge of the transition from urban growth center and typically have a kind of interesting mix of setbacks, green spaces, as well as the typical built form transition. That's maybe a little bit different from your typical kind of 45-degree angle. It's a little one-dimensional. And then lastly, looking at the kind of transit and the kind of future transit proposed in North York, imagining a Shepherd West extension, and not shown here, a potential Finch extension east of to Yonge Street, you can start to see the difference in spacing of these rapid transit centers and the texture and the scale of these things. And that started to kind of give us some ideas about issues and opportunities. And so we'll walk through some of these quickly. First, we really wanted to kind of create a welcoming public realm. There's a broad range of things you can see here that encompasses, includes the sort of streetscapes we talked about, retail frontages as a very important element where it actually, let's say from a design perspective, may be horrible, but from a kind of economic development and a kind of small business perspective, functions really well. And are there lessons to be learned from that? Opportunities to really reinvigorate program and maybe kind of expand upon the public open spaces, considerations of thermal comfort, and opportunities to really weave in Indigenous placemaking. Second thing, looked at really urban street cover. It was radically sort of stood out for us, the kind of divide between lush green that exists outside the center and the very kind of paucity of street trees within. And then from a similar token, the parkland access that we saw. And so the red is areas that are very limited in parkland compared to the city average. Typically the bottom 3/4 of the area are underserviced, even moving into some of the neighborhoods adjacent, whereas the top area towards the north is actually relatively well serviced. And so we'll be touching upon how to address that. Also, opportunities to diversify building types, so really trying to introduce something beyond single detached homes and towers and trying to find the whole suite of missing middle and mid-rise opportunities, as well as some hybrid tall buildings perhaps. And then looking to stitch some of these things and improve those connections. So if we do have a huge population concentrated in the center, but then amenities without, how do you start to maybe stitch those together east to west in a way that brings people and amenities together? All of this is organized around a visioning framework that has 3 overarching lenses: equity, inclusion, truth and reconciliation, and climate change, that, so to speak, can permeate to everything. And then 5 guiding principles that we can kind of walk through a little bit. Complete communities really speaks to the host of housing options that could be provided, diversity of building types, reinforcing the center as a vibrant place for work, arts, and culture. It's important to note that the office area here has really suffered in the last 5 years relative to the downtown core. There's much higher numbers of vacancy rates, and so what happens with some of those buildings is a real consideration for their owners. Greening speaks to the broader sort of public realm and green space network, and then the connectivity and designing for places for people. That speaks to some of those public realm space elements. So with that, we'll just walk you through a couple options. I think it's worth just noting this is a work in progress. These options are all in the process of being developed and will be fed through the usual process of engagement as well as alternatives. The framework includes these 6 points of big moves we've called. We'll walk through them one by one. So completing the center, if we really look at the existing boundary, what we've proposed is a significant expansion, both east and west. This looks to create a pair of shoulders, not unlike what maybe the downtown happened in the 90s. And it's an opportunity to accommodate some diverse building types through that area, understanding there's very few soft sites within the center itself. It also allows for the integration of some secondary complementary streets. We've looked at Willowdale and Empress specifically, but it's also a way to mitigate against some adverse conditions by stacking some of your built form in a way that shields against some of those northwest prevailing winds in the winter. Second point looks at the Yonge Street spine, and there's a host of elements that can combine to that. The first of which is the Transformable Yonge plan that has already been developed separately from us. It looks to essentially take a single lane of traffic off of Yonge, give that back to a pair of cycle tracks in either direction, as well as a deeper public realm that will allow for a full set of trees on either side. And so that's to be considered with the sort of clear framework that identifies a kind of continuous street wall and the 10-meter wide sidewalks along Yonge. We've also created a new height regime, and these create very clear heights in the brown subway stations or height peaks, but then those get tailored to distinct roles. So from a land use perspective, we're seeing Shepherd as the kind of office node. That's kind of an existing thing we're looking to reinforce, whereas North York has much more of a civic and cultural and community role. And Finch is an emerging place where we see a real need for some secondary commercial. So there's been a lot of talk about the need for a supermarket at that north end. There's 2 or 3 in the south, but not north. Second one looks at parkways, are the second big move. And these are a kind of a collection of elements that follow the path of Doris and Beecroft. These were traditionally the service roads in the plan, but have been a place that has accumulated a number of green spaces, whether by design or by accident, over the decades. And the plan, or at least our vision, suggests that we would augment that network with a series of gateway parks. So we'd be stitching the smaller parks together and creating larger parks in areas of greatest need. So we're bringing those parks as close to the center as possible where the population is. Zooming in on one of these along the east side, you can see in the lime green are the 2 existing parks, Willowdale and Lee Lyson, and then the hatched area represents the opportunities for parkland expansion. These could be augmented further if we have a chance to sort of take out some of those east-west local streets, sort of permitting, and then the window streets that run parallel to Doris. So you can imagine a very significant park, sort of 400 meters north to south over time developing, and it's literally next to the highest population density just to the east, or sorry, the west. Now, when we kind of lift ourselves up and take a look at what this looks like, this is a view north along. On the left, we've got the existing buildings, typically a 30-meter sort of setback of green spaces, often private amenity spaces. And then on the right, what you're seeing is sort of the park in the foreground, then the mid-rise building in pink with the sort of window street that's been converted back to green. So we do start to really stitch that series of green spaces on the outside together. The orange, just for reference, is a heritage building that's being protected there. And so I think the next slide just shows what that looks like in section. So what we're showing is maybe some feedback welcome on the height of those buildings. It's a unique condition where the right of way is about 30 meters plus the window street creates a much wider condition. And so how that works, transition, and the appropriateness of mid-rise is maybe something we'd look to panels input on. And then lastly, these roads will maintain an important sort of traffic function. So if we're taking the lanes off Yonge, the traffic will find its way onto Doris and Beecroft. That said, we are looking to provide some improvements, and may not be legible here, but the red arrows represent new crossings, signalized crossings, where we could get people to and from east to west across Doris and Beecroft, really aiming to stitch those neighborhoods together. The next move is something we've called neighborhood main streets. This is primarily Willowdale, north to south. So if you imagine that sort of road example, this is what we're trying to do here. But it also includes Empress, which is the sort of primary east-west bus route that gets you to the Melasman Square. We imagine this area being redeveloped with sort of typical mid-rise and being a sort of place for locally serving retail and commercial uses. So this would be converted to a mixed-use designation. The massing you're seeing is a very strict translation of the updated mid-rise standards, with the one exception that we've pulled back a 3-meter setback from the street in an effort to protect some of the existing mature trees. And so you've got a slightly wider setback along that looks to protect that character. Next piece is something we call living streets. These are the 20 blocks of east-west streets, and we've identified 5 of them specifically as opportunities to create some additional active transportation. These are largely characterized by the very kind of lush green character that Shannon described. Typically low-rise detached houses on an 18-meter right-of-way with, again, deep front yards, often with a single sidewalk only on one side, on-street parking, two-way traffic, all of that. And in the areas where we're preserving the neighborhood designation, we're essentially going to protect that. And then in the areas towards the center where we're going to be converting to mid-rise, we're looking to protect a little bit of that with a 4-meter setback. So looking to protect some of the mature trees in the front yards. Beyond that, the bolder green areas here are representative of some of the improved active transportation ped and bike facilities that will stitch the neighborhood together. Those have been aligned with intersections and crossings that get you to Yonge Street. And then in tandem with that, some improved infrastructure, ideally both, like the same location with space permitting. Well, the last move is around Wilkett Creek, and really this is a historic creek that crosses Yonge Street and was sort of the genesis of the Newton Brook community, which was a mill town that existed here historically. An existing portion of it towards the south and east of Doris is already parkland. It already has a trail, those 2 images from that. But we are looking to sort of build and expand to the north and west, all the way up to the Fitch Hydro Corridor. In that area, it's much more broken. There are elements that are fully below grade in sewers. There are elements that are fully naturalized and daylit. It's really a hodgepodge. There's no continuity of walking trails, but there is an opportunity really to stitch that north all the way up to the Hydro Corridor, which has a major east-west trail. So we can see this as a thing that really contributes to that network. So broadly, that trail or that opportunity could include a continuous multi-use path, serious opportunities for Indigenous placekeeping, improved access and visibility from that trail, some ways to look at stormwater management, naturalization, daylighting, and all of those things that go with it. And then the last little bit that's sort of interesting is through the urban growth center. It's a much more urban condition. We do suggest a new crosswalk along Beecroft that'll really make that path continuous, so you're not going off the path. And then there's 2 publicly owned sites there, actually, quite opportunistically, that could be through a redevelopment, integrate an element of this path to maintain some of that continuity or some didactic sort of placemaking opportunities that speak to the green character and history of the creek, or in the more urban conditions on Yonge Street, streetscape paving and ideas like the kind of Garrison Creek markers that sort of speak to the memory of the thing that may have existed in the past. And so together those elements create that complete framework. How am I on time?
You're doing well. We've got another 2-3 minutes.
So we're just going to walk through the last thing, which we've called moments. These are much more specific things. The first of them is social streets, and they're the pink spots, primarily along the Yonge Street frontage, but also along Willowdale and one on Shepherd. These are places where we've got an existing or planned social activity, retail or institutional spaces. You can see the image on the left. On the bottom is the Spring Garden Avenue, where you've got one of these 80s apartment blocks with that 1-story podium and relatively well-leased, well-used food and beverage, primarily retail uses. That said, the road itself is anywhere from 11 to 12 meters of pavement to a few trees, very little softscape. And so together we think there's an opportunity that the social streets could, first of all, tighten that up to the kind of minimum 6 meters that gets us the 2 lanes of traffic, very targeted laybys, and then with that giving us much space back over to the boulevard treatments in support of those retail uses. So you can see, maybe you didn't notice, but in the previous image, they did do a lot of the cafe TO type stuff. And so could that be formalized through or redesign the streetscape? We've picked streets specifically that don't have through traffic. They don't come to signalized intersections, so they're only serving the local access. And so we do think While we maintain traffic for that purpose, there are opportunities to close things off in a kind of festival condition. And so if you see that little blue cyan car turning into a laneway, anything to the left of that perhaps could be closed and still maintaining access to all of the development sites. And so that's something that could be done periodically. And just as an example, if you're familiar with Huron Street in Chinatown, north of Dundas, this is a planning partnership project that looks to take some of that pavement treatment, pairing it with public art and other features along a busy commercial street, but still allowing a little bit of that sort of service access. I think pending some traffic modeling, these could also be turned into one-way streets and then perhaps seasonally closed as well. And then the last one, we've zeroed in on the Finch parking lot as a big idea where I think the panel may sort of help pull things together. The Finch Hydro Corridor passes right at the subway station. It's home to 3,000 plus parking spots, beautiful field of asphalt. And with the extension of the Yonge subway north into Markham, we feel that some of this function may become redundant. It has no development potential as a hydro corridor, and it's immediately adjacent to a number of parks that exist already. And so are there opportunities in the fullness of time to transform that into something that contributes a little bit more to the green network? And is there an opportunity to do a signature green space a la the Meadowway and integrate a combination of allotment gardens, naturalized areas, recreational trails, and so on? So with that, I say thank you and remind you of our questions.
Great. Thank both teams for the information you've shared with us. There's certainly been an incredible amount of effort towards this, quality effort. We're going to move on to questions of clarification from panel members, back to the city team, the former team, and I'm going to suggest starting, I'll ask the panel members that are with us virtually, Eladia and Joe, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do actually.
Okay, Lydia, you go first and then Joe.
I had just a question regarding the key identified areas for linear parkway connection. Wilkett Creek Trail was mentioned, along with connecting the parkways flanking. Looks like flanking the major streets there. So is there any plan to formalize this with either incentives or guidelines, toolkits for properties flanking these locations, essentially formalizing the plan's intentions so that private owners and developers can support implementation of these intentions?
If I may.
Yes.
Through the chair. The short answer is yes. I think what you're seeing here in the, maybe not so clearly, the green crosshatch are areas where we're proposing those will be parkland acquisition areas. So large portions of this would be secured through the parkland program and then administered through the city. Other elements would be codified in a 5-meter setback that we're proposing along all park frontages for development. Beyond that, I think we would be making recommendations around sort of opportunities for Wilkett Creek that hopefully get picked up by others in a sort of future study. I think it would likely be within a secondary plan limited to sort of an opportunity and recommendation for future work. Yeah, fair.
I would just add that there is an implementation strategy that will accompany the secondary plan, and that's in phase 3. So, we're early days thinking on a lot of those, so welcome the suggestions, and it certainly is something that will be given more thought.
Lady, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. On to Joe.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate all of the very, very good work that's gone on. But in the package that was submitted to the panel members, there's an appendix that includes built form illustrations, which was not presented today, unless I missed it. Could I ask the city and consultant team to talk about the appendix that was submitted and why wasn't that described or part of the presentation? I'm unclear. I guess I'm a little confused then about what we're to comment on. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Are you planning on presenting that today?
I'd look to the city as to what we're able to share.
There was an email specifically about the appendix to us as well, right?
My understanding was the appendix was not public material, so some additional materials were shared there for context for the panel members. The maps themselves are public. They were released in March, and they're available on our project website. Additionally, there are some 3D demonstration models that are not public as of now. So I believe that was our understanding.
So
I'm happy to.
Joe, this would be good, I think, panel would appreciate that. Is that okay?
For the discussion, yeah. And again, I would say that they're demonstration models, and they are part of the options. We're not going to be sharing.
Would it be helpful for me to walk through them?
Yes,
We can use our Imaginariums.
Yes, yes.
I will. Give me a second. I'll reference them. I mean. So the document was organized in a series of districts that are broadly organized around building types. You can see it as well in the height map that within the urban growth center, we've primarily looked at a sort of tall building types. We've increased the heights relative to the existing secondary plan around the 3 subway stations, generally consistent with sort of where the OLT is landed on a number of things. They're typically tall buildings, following the tall building guidelines and then adopting a lot of the ground floor streetscape volume requirements that were in the existing secondary plan. So the 10 meters from existing curb, broad streetscape, and then 25-meter tower celebrations. Moving beyond that around the centers, we've got purple areas, which follow broadly Finch and Shepherd. These are sort of areas of transition along those 2 corridors. We thought they were higher density, but essentially stepping down from those nodes. And then are typically going from sort of a tall building at the center out to more of a mid-rise condition as you expand to the outside of the center, or the edge of our study area. The orange represents, sorry, I should have said.
It might be more helpful if you put up the building heights map. Maybe that will help, even though we don't have the built form model, and might be easier to replace those colors. I'm not sure. I think it's.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. And excerpts of the built form model will be released in our draft report shortly. It's just, that work is not completed from these materials.
Yeah, so just to maybe reorient everybody, the brown areas are what I described originally as the 3 nodes, height peaks. The dark red and the pink are the areas in between where it's a slightly lower height limit. 40 stories along Yonge Street, and then 25 towards the edges. That's generally consistent with the original secondary plan. The areas where we've expanded beyond the center are the sort of brown on this view, the light brown. Those are the areas that really are transitioning from tall closest to the center to mid-rise as you go out along Finch and Shepherd. And then the really sort of the large transformation area is the orange, and that is typically a mid-rise. So these are areas that are currently neighborhoods outside the urban growth center. And we're imagining those get transformed to typically 6 to 7 stories, basically a 1-to-1 relationship to the right of way. Those are the areas immediately outside the center, largely following the MTSA or kind of a quick walk to the subways, as well as the Empress corridor that runs east-west. and then the Willowdale corridor that runs north-south, and that was sort of inspired by the sort of Avenue Road, pleasant kind of idea from Young and Eglinton. The area in the very pale, looks like pink on this screen, maybe like yellow on other screens. In the middle is preserved as capital N neighborhoods, so that would still be low rise, but allowing all the kind of recent EHON permissions for laneways or other suites as they evolve. And so I think I've covered off. I don't know, Joe, was that, it's hard, a little hard to explain, but did that help?
This has been very, very helpful. That was a really great explanation. Thank you. And this map is really informative, and I'm just say thank you again. Appreciate it. You explained it very well.
It's great. Thank you for the question, Joe, and thanks for sharing that with us. Joe, do you have any other questions? No? Okay. Around the table, we'll start with Heather.
This actually is a good map for, I know you guys have taken a very particular look at the conditions along Doris and Beecroft, but we're being asked the first question about those two streets. Would you say that I'm correct in saying that Doris is really a street that negotiates between high-rise and mid-rise versus Beecroft, which is really negotiating between mid-rise and single-family houses more generally? No?
If you look on this image, they're both quite similar in that Cypress Center is typically single-family homes with new townhouses that have started to emerge, or the bungalows that have been converted into 3,000 square foot kind of 3-story French chateaus.
I did a Google tour kind of as best I could.
So they're quite similar in some ways, and then inside is almost exclusively tall buildings.
Yeah, okay.
The perimeter along Doris and Beecroft is very, almost exclusively the kind of these slabbier buildings that run north-south parallel to the street with a deep setback. So you'll often get either the outdoor amenity space or a park or the drop off of Doris and Beecroft.
Okay. I felt like Beecroft on the west side had a lot of single family side lot conditions. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
When Doris and Beecroft are completely new streets that would have been cut through mid-block, and so you're just getting what side conditions left over.
Okay. And then second side.
A little bit here, Heather, if that helps.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Doris. Yeah. Wilkinson, yeah. But in the future, that's been highlighted as mid-rise. So I guess I should have said in the future context. So this side is really going between high-rise and mid-rise versus the other side, which is more.
Both would have mid-rise immediately outside Doris and Beecroft.
Okay.
On the east side, that mid-rise designation goes much further, sort of 200 meters to Kenneth typically.
Yeah.
Whereas on the west side, it only goes back a certain portion of the block.
Because Beecroft is so much closer to Young, essentially, right?
Beecroft is a little bit closer to Young. There's also the area, I think, that Paul's speaking to. It's hard to see on that map. Actually, Paul, I'm going to go back to the high. Even just stopping there. The west side, the reason that doesn't move as far west is you see that rectangular green block. That's the cemetery. So there's a different context in the middle of the area going west of Beecroft where there's no development potential anyways because of the cemetery. So there's no need to pull the boundary west for that sort of middle area. And then as Beecroft curves in, you see that in the map Paul had earlier, you see again that gold or dark orange between Beecroft and the edge of the plan at the north and at the south, but there's sort of a different contact for a few blocks in the middle there.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And then I have just a second question. I'm just wondering about the use of the term gateway park, just making sure, just I'm not missing anything here, but maybe you could describe what you would like to get out of that. I'm assuming it's a park on two sides of the street, that it's a kind of threshold condition between one neighborhood to something else. I'm just wondering, what makes Gateway Park different than any other park? And
I think it's something we've all discussed many a time.
okay, okay. So it's not a
With
double question.
consensus.
Yeah.
For clarity, I think we've got consensus. The idea primarily is that it's a gateway from the neighborhoods to the center.
To the center.
Okay. They're primarily, we're really trying to do some larger parts. The area is really, we've got a lot of these leftover bits through the creation of Doris and Beecroft, kind of leftover triangular orphan bits of land that haven't been helpful. They can maybe support a playground or a dog park. And we're trying to consolidate that into something bigger. And so the opportunity, especially here on the east between the Leaf Lifeson Park
Yeah.
and Willowdale Park, to create something collectively. And in the fullness of time, if we can convert those east-west streets plus the window streets into parkland as well, those 4 blocks can become a significant thing that then can be programmed quite differently. There's very few sports fields in this area.
Thank you.
Okay. Megan, then.
The Wilkett Creek.
Yeah.
I mean, I see it on the plan, but like can you talk more about its impact or what you imagine the impact will be on the developments around? Like, I see that there are parks made around, but I totally buildings. What do we, like, is it gonna have a bigger footprint than that in terms of impact?
Yeah, it's a good question. Find there. To just.
That's okay.
I think for the most part, it's a kind of art of the possible, so it will be carving out a lot of these backyard spaces through the area, with the exception of the segment through here that goes through the gateway parks. And then there's an area here south of Shepherd where there's these very shallow blocks either side of it that have single family homes backing onto them that we've identified as a sort of parkland acquisition piece. So those would, you triple the width of the park there, and then we've permitted the taller buildings on the flanking side. So you're creating a unique condition for a portion here. And then this is more about park, but through here, it's really about a kind of linear thing. Why? I think that's something we should follow up.
Okay, Meg, any other questions?
Nope, that's great.
Michael?
Just thinking about one of the questions were asked about when tall buildings, more taller buildings are added. What can we offer about transitions? And remembering that whenever I'm on Yonge Street in that area, I feel like there's an exaggerated wind condition in that area. And I wonder whether, first of all, whether the 10-meter setback without the expected sidewalk developments has resulted in this unusually strong wind condition. Secondly, I'm not remember what the name of the program is, but the Renew Yonge Street, I'm assuming is trying to find ways to add more trees in specifically this area. So hopefully that manages that grade wind conditions a little bit better. Just looking at it on Google Maps, I'm noting that there are very few podium conditions right on Yonge Street. It's not, if there are a few, but they're not consistent. And we know that there's a hypothesis that they help. We think they help. Again, I'm looking here, and I remember there being many more than there are podia along Yonge Street. I see many face of towers. So the question would be, do we have a tool to now restore the need for significant new podia in that area that recognize that even taller buildings than are there now will create even greater wind shear at that. Assuming that the streetscapes will begin to handle some improvement on the 10-meter curve to building.
So I'll go through this maybe in sequence. So yes, the Transform Yonge, the new branding, includes significantly wide boulevards with tree planting as a kind of part of it. So that is one mitigation strategy. Second point, it is a very heterogeneous mix of stuff. You do have those 90s style podiums that are typically 1 story, maybe 2. You have a handful of the more contemporary tall building ones that are often very tight, so they're not necessarily all to standard. You have a lot of office buildings that in some cases go straight down with not even a canopy. You have other ones that are set back, and so it's quite heterogeneous. The challenge we've got is there's probably only about 3-4 soft sites that face up to Yonge. 2. There's very few,
So not much impact there.
well, not much opportunity from a pure development perspective. I think it'll be more about how do you retrofit existing podiums and what do you do in that public streetscape? What do you do on public buildings? Because there's many public buildings along there. The true development is actually the opportunity is kind of just outside of the frontage. And so a lot of our effort working with RWDI has been about identifying the kind of right mix of buildings, especially that capture the north wind, west winds, and mitigating that through, you'll see some of the broader tall buildings around Shepherd and Finch.
Just how that was identified as one of the benefits of expanding the area and introducing those mid-rise shoulders is that it does break up the prevailing winds and improve the conditions.
Yeah, the existing single-family home to a 20-story tower is the absolute perspective. So we actually found the Beecroft frontage towards the northwest was the worst because you've got the wind just coming straight over those single-family homes hitting up.
So we actually, like, one of the consultants like to do this wind studies comparing the existing conditions and the other options. So it's actually part of that reason that you just point out that drive us to actually think about having those mid-rise building, you know, to the east and west of Doris and Beecroft. It helps with the wind conditions, actually, in particular along Yonge streets.
Sometimes I'm having trouble mapping the current conditions with the new conditions being proposed, but I know that in the tours that we took along Doris, there was a good stretch, I think it was about 5 blocks where the buildings were set back, seemed like 20 or 30 meters on the west side. And then, and you got a sense of the emergence of a linear park, knowing that it's mostly privately owned, linear open space, thank you. And I wondered whether, my understanding was at the time, this was a very important strategy to mitigate new tall buildings near the existing low scale. We no longer have tools that give us the possibility of 20 or 30 meter setbacks, I'm assuming. But we did mention that on the east side of Doris, you're proposing not only just parks, but also an increased setback. Did I have that right?
5 meter setback would be for buildings facing parks. So if it's just facing Doris on its own or Beecroft on its own, it would be a setback. Yeah.
So maybe the question phrased more succinctly, any chance of sustaining that landscape open space experience by increased setbacks there, but you can mention
Sort of on the order of 20 to 30 meters.
so there's some kind of, I thought I heard you say 10 and I was thinking, well, that's getting close.
Yeah, the challenge there, I think, is just the speculating beyond my kind of area of expertise, but the market conditions and the kind of assembly would be very difficult to get people to buy 4 or 5 houses to get a 20 meter setback and then 5, 6 to actually do the building. So we're trying to be kind of realistic about that. The opportunity we do see is in the window streets. So those local streets do loop. And so there's a condition where they run parallel to Doris and Beecroft, and that's typically, I think it was about 15 meters of space that's publicly owned. And as those sites get assembled and developed or turned into parks, it's no longer required for basic servicing and access. It could be turned over to green spaces. whether that's administered through parks or transportation services or other. So there, I think it's more of a what is publicly possible.
Right.
Thank you.
Great, I just have one question. This is a good photograph. So this area that's here right now, which has a fair amount of tree canopy, would be replaced by, I think it was,
6 to 7 story mid-rise.
so,
But also some of those parks, the gateway parks are in those areas.
would there be do you have a plan or a formula of how to compensate or replace that loss of tree canopy?
Not in detail. I think what we've identified is the form setback of the front yard, so that would allow for protection of some of the mature trees on that frontage. Some of them already exist in the right of way itself. It's the backyard trees that might be more challenged. And we haven't dove into how that could be preserved in detail, but there would also be a kind of, what do you call it, replacement policy that's standard citywide as well.
Okay, thank you. Panel members, if there aren't any more questions, what I'm going to suggest we do is move into panel member comments. We have about 40 minutes, but I'm going to suggest we have 6 people. I'm going to say self-manage your time, 5 minutes per person. And if you still have enough oxygen in the room and it's not too hot, and people have questions, we'll continue on or further comments. So I'm going to suggest that we start with Avadia and Joe, who are virtual, and then we'll move to Meg, Michael, Heather, and Nate. So Avadia, would you like to start on our behalf?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for the, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You can. Okay, good. Thanks for the presentation and the materials provided. It's a really comprehensive representation of the intentions. So thanks for that. I can sense that there's been a great deal of work to come up with the spatial relationships that guide the plan. So I'm going to perhaps comment a little less on those things and maybe a little bit more on how in future the plan gets rolled out so that it's effective in achieving its goals. So one thing I have noticed is that if there's a lot of private ownership of land adjacent to intended linear parkway systems or, as you call it, green-blue infrastructure, it's largely in the owner's hands whether the sort of revegetation and character of those spaces is achieved. What helps a great deal is if there's a really comprehensive support system to help private owners improve their properties easily. So I am a property owner and I have difficulty even improving my yard because there's no native plants available. So what we end up seeing is sort of as we've seen in a lot of the imagery provided, a lot of mown grass with some feature landscape elements, which are frequently imported plants or exotics that aren't native to the area. And of course, what we'd like to see is those linear parkway systems and the open space amenity areas to be inhabited by a really strong urban forest that includes understory elements as well as supports the types of vegetation that all other creatures rely on to thrive. And that's what actually really makes for amazing neighborhoods, part of what makes for amazing neighborhoods. So what I'd say is what can help people do that is one, maybe try and develop for North York, and we have, a good runway to do this, maybe a toolkit of resources where one can purchase native plants, a good toolkit of excellent landscape design tools that are easy to use, and support for private owners to enhance the urban forest. So those things can make a big difference to whether your private owners just mow their grass or if they actually support some of those linear parkway systems to become revitalized habitat zones. So that's one thing that stood out for me. The other benefit of thinking in that way about potential linear parkway systems would be soil health. So soil health is a big thing and can be significantly
so.
improved by things like rainways. Instead of focusing on sort of gray infrastructure to carry away wastewater, focusing on keeping that water in the soils, nurturing the plant life and other creatures that rely on it. So those rainways can really help with the big climate events that we are seeing more and more of that have led to flooding in other areas of Toronto. I'm not sure how subject to flooding North York is, but it's good to plan for the future. So that's another thing that I didn't necessarily see in the materials. And focusing on soil health, connecting up areas of living soils with other areas of living soils, so you have a continuous network of soil health, I think would be really good. And then finally, I'm just going to touch on some character elements. I know Toronto introduced a bylaw some time ago that precluded street signage, and you see some images of Toronto pre that bylaw, and it's really textural and interesting. And as we're, you showed some images of small scale retail and how they sort of characterize those social streets. Um, if the North York could see their way clear to removing those bylaw restrictions, I think it could make for a really interesting character, because when you do have on-street signage, it creates this a highly textural, very strong character to neighborhoods. And yeah, it looks a little messy, but like maybe we're ready for that. So anyway, that's a thought that I had. So thanks again for the presentation. Those are some of the thoughts that cover some points that perhaps didn't necessarily see fully fleshed out. Thanks much.
Great. Thanks very much, Amelia. On to you, Joe.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you to the city team. Thank you to the consulting team for this exploration of how we evolve our city and welcome more people in a thoughtful, practical, logical way. And I think that's effectively what this project is all about in terms of the North York Civic Center. I'm speaking to all of you from the Ontario Association of Architects 2025 conference. And I'm mentioning that because the theme of this conference is reshaping communities. And that theme seems very appropriate to what this project is all about. I want to talk about a few themes. Visualizations, how important they are about our future. The theme of two rivers that has been mentioned and that I don't think is actually that relevant. The importance of parkland acquisition strategy. The topic of community capacity and the topic of transition, which I want to comment on, excuse me. And what I would describe as commitment on the part of the city. So let me come back through those things. What I am missing, so first of all, let me just say, there are many, many great things in this package. It is a great historical overview. It describes, okay, how have we come to where we are? And okay, now what? And how do we expand the picture? And I would suggest that we are in an era where nuance is challenging. And what I mean by that is that I think we need to define a broader area for growth in the North York Center without too many conditions attached. And see how things evolve. I think existing ownership patterns, which are not part of the presentation, and can I just suggest are the most important oversight in this presentation, because ownership patterns describe opportunity. So I would just say that that's not been evident to me in what's being described. One other thing that I think this project really promises, Michael Leckman asked the question in the pre-hearing, have we ever seen anything like this in terms of the extent of impact and, transformation? The other project that the design review panel has seen relatively recently that does seem relevant to me is along the Ellen Expressway and the rethinking of that corridor. And, this is even more significant. So, and I think these are the two projects that are perhaps setting a precedent for how we think about this. Appreciating that a lot of other people want to have comments. On the topic of transition, may I just suggest chill? This issue of trying to shrink wrap the manner in which redevelopment of our city will occur is being overemphasized. And I would just suggest a bit of a chill on this topic of transition. I would instead suggest much more emphasis on community capacity and what that means and how we deliver on that topic, which I think is sadly not being explored in the way that it should be. The Two Rivers theme, yeah, I get it, I see it, but candidly, I don't think that has a lot to do with anything that's going on right now or how this is going to evolve. And so I get it's an interesting story, but I don't think it's that relevant, candidly. Parkland acquisition, that is a huge topic. The manner in which this evolution of the North York Civic Center contributes to enhanced open space is the reason why this is going to succeed or not. I really like the explorations of the design team thus far. And I would emphasize that that is such an important topic. And I just really like the work that I've seen in the presentation so far. And appreciating everybody else has lots to say. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Joe. On to Meg.
Thank you. Great points by Lee. It's problem with going second or doing the fourth. So kind of a thing. I'd like to say also that I think a different level of, like in the next stage, a different level of visualization is one that takes into account. I think the property ownership is, I agree, that's incredibly important, but also more of the topography. Understanding that there's this, and I just don't know how much of topography there is, but that's where the question for me. The lady had talked about landscape, and I want to talk about landscape connectivity and the creation of neighborhoods that have a much greater landscape connectivity throughout them than just necessarily around like the Wilton Creek or other green spaces that have been identified as possible parkland, which is to say, it goes in part to question Joe asked, or no, I think Gordon asked about the trees. It's not about, it's just about a different level of it, or different kind of green infrastructure, or different kind of infrastructure, green infrastructure that then has an impact on development and on scale of development and the density of development. I agree with Joe. I'm not sure that like transition. I don't know that the transitions are the most important thing anymore. I think that it's a sort of more detailed or more more complex lands, planning landscape where it's a sort of planning consideration where the green space is comfortably trade. I would give more height if I got more green and if I got more public realm down at the bottom. I think that the public realm, the widths are fantastic. I mean, I didn't start off by saying that's amazing. I love the grade of the social streets. I think that's fantastic too. But what I'd really love to see are more mid-block connection through the fabric, like east and west of Yonge Street, or not mid-block, but more green that goes through. And it doesn't always have to be continuous, but bridges and areas for soccer fields, for just birds and squirrels and all those things, and kids and dogs and people and all those things that actually happen at grade, which is all by way of like back to the topography, for sure that the Willow Creek actually plays a stronger role in defining what goes along, goes sort of north, south, or northeast, southwest, southeast, northwest, through how that defines the built fabric and the transitions that then would happen from Willow Creek. Like maybe Willow Creek isn't ultimately, I don't know at all, but maybe it's not ultimately as interesting as say the Dawn. I get that, but like we could use it that way. We could make it, we could say, let's just take that as our premise and build around that and give it back a verge or a verge that then can take on a life of its own. And that's how we layer up, rather than layering out from young. We use the natural infrastructure as the way of defining density or setting densities and heights. And again, underscoring that I would give height. I would give hands. We need to do it in order to secure more of that public realm, which I think really is all the heavy lifting for us in our world and that we share. I'm actually going to leave it at that. I think that's my reason.
Thank you, Gordon. I really appreciate the presentation, the verbal presentation. I have to admit that it took me a few readings to get into the rhythm of the material presented. And of course, the sequence of slides and the animated layering of things in your verbal presentation helped a lot. So I was not completely sure of what I was seeing when I was doing it on my own, and I'm really glad that we had a chance to hear you today. One of the things that I really love about the work that's been done is that, and partly it's practical, but it's also a turn of mind, resisting the urge to generalize solutions and looking instead, first of all, understanding the context extremely well, understanding what possibilities emerge from the context, extending those contexts, those possibilities into moments, and having the moments then tell you what you have discovered. And I'm just thinking about, Doris right now, and the fact that there's so much green open space on the east side of the street. You're adding to it, on the west side of the street. You're adding to it now on the east side of the street, and suddenly a linear park defined by its natural boundaries, its possibilities, is emerging. And now you've done that numerous times in the way that you've seen strategies possible. Like others, I think the ability to identify networks of and secure public open space in this expansion is by far the most important aspect and most important ingredient to success for this study. And so it's there. In my own version of your plan, I just added a little bit of green on the west side of Yonge Street, which doesn't belong to the city, doesn't belong to anyone, but we know greatly impacts everyone's life. Well, in fact, in this case, death too. by having all that green space, all that relief from heat island effect, something that's really noticed it in that neighborhood. So all to say, first of all, the other thing I would say is that the issues that you've identified and the way that you've broken them down, I appreciate, because it represents many, many decades of planning conversations applied to this site. And in each one of them, I'm thinking about what you're calling social streets, each one of them, little experiments, they're kind of mini labs that happen in other neighborhoods. Here you are applying it to the creation of, as we said, one of the biggest projects we've seen. Maybe I'm going to correct myself, possibly Downsview is the equivalent in scale and magnitude to this. But I don't think we've seen an existing neighborhood proposed for this dramatic a change in all the time that we've been here. So I guess I'm saying that the proposal that you've got is capturing a cultural knowledge that I'm really very much appreciating. The issue of transitions, you've heard a couple of different opinions on it, and I think on the question of Yonge Street, sounds like the Transform Yonge is the next step for us to understand whether what lessons we've learned from other windy areas will actually work here, and whether they'll be the corrective that we're hoping for. In the neighborhoods themselves, you've got many strategies running through. We in the pre-meeting talked a little bit about tree canopy and all of the tree canopy immediately to the east of Doris that's going to be removed and replaced with a different strategy. You've talked about setbacks, 3 meter and 4 meter setbacks. I think the houses in the neighborhoods, the single family neighborhoods, are 6 meter setbacks now. And I know what you're going to say, but I think that there's an opportunity for a radical. So we're going to see the need for tree canopy increase dramatically over the next 20 and 30 years. So if there's a way to include a radical way of thinking about tree canopy in this new area that has not been pursued elsewhere, but could be pursued here, that recognizes the kind of the hot future and the need for shade. I would think that would be one way of recognizing the loss of tree canopy and the renewal of tree canopy in the zone, which is going to be the biggest transformation immediately east of Doris. And one of the comments that I had when I was looking through it was, how does one improve these greenways? And my thought was that one should be looking at it at a granular level, have narratives, many different narratives along the way, not a single narrative from north to south, because one of the things about single narratives on wide highways is that suddenly you're traveling a little bit faster and it all seems like a blur. How do you encourage the slowdown of traffic? Is by having each block be treated in a way that is singular and identifiable, so that you're not racing through this thing, you're actually seeing new narratives on each major block, potentially, as a way of working at a fine grain, developing a specific narrative, creating a kind of a meaningful diversity along this 1 kilometer long stretch related to neighborhood narratives, species narratives, a landscape identity. But that would be it for me. Thanks very much for your presentation and for framework. Thank you.
Thank you. I very much appreciated the descriptions from both presenters about moving from a kind of linear center to building out the shoulders of the study. So I think that really resonated well, or kicking it wide, as you said. I think it automatically focuses emphasis on the east-west portions of the study versus the linearity of Yonge Street, which was focus of so many mayors up here. I also really appreciated, like Michael, I believe, the classification of big moves and then the moments. And especially like the designation of the social street, and I agree with some of Olivia's comments about those maybe not being so polite, but a little bit more gritty in nature, and being able to evolve and represent maybe the different conditions that happen north-south within the study. I think, from Michael's comment. It was great to hear that the study tries to hang on to as much green as possible, where it makes sense and can be amalgamated. I like the clear idea of linear green spaces along Beecroft and building out that existing network. But I also wonder how we can ensure that these green spaces that are along 4-lane streets are really successful. I think it's one of my particular bones to pick, but having the public parks on main streets, I think it's great in lots of ways as kind of indicators of open space, but I think the use is challenged that way, and it doesn't feel safe for young families and dogs chasing balls, any of that stuff. So one of the devices, planting, but other safety measures, maybe it is more sports fields with, I dare say, fences, but I don't know. So I think we just have to think about those types of uses. I was surprised in one of the maps that it did seem that the south and east area of the study, where I think it was like pink and maroon, really had like no neighborhood parks at all. And in my experience, those are the parks that really are the most well used because they're safe and they're of a scale where you can really see everything that's going on. So maybe a strategy for those. And then we've been asked about the mid-rise built form considerations specifically. I've been on a bunch of panels about mid-rise lately. And I think that this is a housing type that is really ripe for disruption. Prefabrication and mass timber coming to that particular type of housing. That those types of construction really rely on a lot of repeatability, lack of setbacks, really not very much appetite for balconies at all. And I think I'm not saying that those things are all necessarily bad or, and maybe all at once they're bad, but I think we all need to keep an eye on some of the way these are shaping up. And then with respect to not the built form, but uses in mid-rise buildings, I think it shouldn't be just amenity and retail at the base, but really encourage community uses, even if they're quite small. I think they're very, very meaningful. And then a lot more kind of service-based uses, which you guys have done the studies, probably are needed in the area, but dentists, all that kind of stuff. People just forget about those, and mid-rises are really challenged to provide anything other than amenity themselves. So I think that's an issue. Also, just wanted to mention that our office has been asked to look at some office to resi conversions in this area. We mentioned a lot of the offices I think are underused, so not sure if you've taken those numbers into account in your studies, but it's going to be very challenging for those projects to provide all of the amenity space required, and maybe there's a different aspect of those projects have to give back, like I don't know, one tree for every converted, I don't know what, but maybe that just allows affords some kind of opportunity for this new way of thinking of what those types of projects could give back.
Thank you, Heather. Last but not least, James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks everyone for the presentations.
I think the vision seems quite logical and a really sensible expansion of the center. It seems to me you're addressing all of the major issues to create a successful expanded community. The other panelists have raised some challenging issues to address, and I'm sure you're up to this. Good luck. One of the key challenges, I think, in terms of mobility is creating a safe, welcoming pedestrian experience to get all of those new residents and visitors focused on walking. All of them, the north-south streets have really been designed to move vehicles quickly. I mean, we brought to numerous other attendants, particularly my path, right? And young, we heard a lot during reading this. Young is either crammed with cars or during off-peak hours, it's got people zooming through at 90 kilometers an hour. So trying to make this a more walkable community is a challenge. So I certainly do support the idea of crossings, or some Beecroft, to slow the traffic down there and make east-west access easier. And so opening some of the window streets, I think would also add flexibility and chance of access to. I think some of the side streets as one way, as you suggested, Paul, that is under study. That would provide more space for greening of those side streets, for patios, for more trees, for other elements of living streets. So I think that would be great. And that's also an important consideration in creating that comfortable, cooling pedestrian atmosphere in different ways. The loss of the tree canopy east of Doris, I think it is one major concern. Just looking at that photograph really brings it home. So I think that does need to somehow be explicitly considered within the context of the issues that Meg raised. And I did think Heather's idea, if there's a conversion going on, they should have to plant more trees somewhere. More things, small scale retail, I think really also supports more pedestrian activity. That's something that, I worked in this area. I saw as the side streets in the center are certainly the most welcoming, and you can scale down with the little shops and the Asian restaurants and everything that's there. So it'd be great to see more of that replicated on first and really on the streets and maintained up here. And finally, I think putting more focus on the heritage of the Creek is a great idea. Will also help create a greater sense of place. That concludes my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I think we caught everybody. Thank you, members, for all these comments. As you know, you'll receive and you're writing down some of these comments.
Lydia? Joe?
Ladia, oh no, okay, Ladia first, you have a comment, and then Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Just on redirect, thank you. I think my esteemed colleague here, Joe Lobko, if I'm not mistaken, had mentioned that the rivers aren't really part of what's going on right now. However, I just wanted to emphasize how critical the health of rivers is to the character of neighborhoods, and how powerful it is when neighborhoods turn back towards their rivers. So even though it may not characterize the neighborhood at present, if that's a long-term goal of the neighborhood, I feel that's very, very powerful. And sometimes if we think of watersheds leading into rivers as entities that we have responsibility to care for, that can really mobilize individual property owners and the neighborhood as a whole to think about the decisions they're making that will benefit that watershed, and they start to feel part of that watershed as though they belong to that watershed. And so if we start defining ourselves again by the watersheds we are responsible towards and that we belong to, I think we would be better humans, and we'd be much happier in our in our lives. And even in urban zones, I think this is an important thing to remember and reintroduce, because oftentimes those watersheds are sublimated, they're put into pipeway systems and invisible to us. I don't think that makes for healthy neighborhoods, and it certainly doesn't make for climate resilient neighborhoods. So I think that's an important point to really commend this study on, is to make that a characterizing feature. And I think that is a really powerful position. So from my perspective anyways, I would respectfully disagree and say that's an important element of this plan.
Thank you. And Joe?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I actually, Eladia, thank you for that. And I actually am not disagreeing with you, just to be clear. What I'm saying is a bit of a different point. But first of all, may I just first and very clearly agree with everything Eladia just said. Full stop. Okay, Eladia, just to be really clear. What I'm saying is that the work yet has adequately visualized alternative futures. And I think I was not clear and candidly not, I didn't clearly articulate what my earlier comments. So, Eladia, just to be very clear, I think you and I are on the same page. My point is this, that I am trying to encourage the team to visualize. So let me be really clear. My criticism is on the visualizations of the future. My criticism is that I would say the city and consultant team needs to spend more time on appreciating the values that have been described, including Eladia's comments, that the future opportunities here have not been visualized in a way that is incredibly important to how to bring everybody together about how we grow the North York Civic Center. So apologies if my earlier comments were not clear enough, but that's what I'm focused on. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thanks for letting me know. Two people in the ether there. I think you've heard a lot today. Certainly I've been taking notes, and I can tell that the panel members are intrigued by this initiative. It's a big one. You're taking big, bold steps, and with that comes all sorts of things that need to be looked at really, really carefully, and from the feedback in more detail, more depth. But one takeaway I had was somebody had a comment about don't generalize. And we've seen lots of projects where things are generalized, and some that are of similar size to this, and have a similar potential weight to them. And in some cases, we look at that, and that's all that team is going to give, is generalization. But you have shown as a team to go beyond that. And I take an example that when you talk about a particular street where there's a certain way in which the retail works, that is something that you want to help and not take advantage of. You're showing an ability to look beyond the generalizations and really look at the place as it is and pick up on the pieces and let them drive it. At times you have to use data. Remember, we had that conversation a little bit earlier. You need it. You need it to be able to do a certain thing. But the sweet spots that are coming out are the ones where you kind of do it by not looking so much at the data, but by looking at the land, looking at the topography, looking at how people are using the street, where there are things that are happening that you're able to take advantage of. And that's a unique talent. It's a unique talent. Not all teams do this. So what I'm hearing is that you got to do more of that. You got to take every single thing that you've written down, and you got to make sure that you've seen it in that way, and never default to a generalization. I don't think that's what I know. Certainly, what's come through in the comments is that in many ways the landscape is going to be a very important thing. I think it's a comment, I think perhaps that you had made in Baden-Baden, Michael, about the landscape, say city, say the neighborhood. That's going to happen here. And that's why there's so many comments, so many questions about green, so many comments about tree canopy, about the word sponginess hasn't been used, but that, and if you're picking this site, this piece of land to do different things with, and that weighs on your shoulders, but at the same time, you have the talent and the intelligence and the raw talent, the pure talent to do it. It's really important. I think in addition to green, context came up often, and I think that is already covered in some of the comments that I've just made. You've shown an ability to look deeply at context. You gotta look at all of it. You gotta take advantage of all of it. Make sure that nothing is just a surface treatment, that the photos aren't just picked because they look nice, which you don't do, but they actually carry a strategy to it. So you've got the detailed comments that come from panel members, and you've got this sort of slightly wandering overview. Thank you very much. We appreciate the time you take, especially in this warm air, which we don't want Norfolk, New York to be in. So thank you very much.
There's the Roomba again on the floor above.
Yeah.
Is that the room?
But we saw.
We really do.
Yes, we do.
Together.
Together.
Despite all the
We'll deal with the.
So thank you for what you've done. Thanks for your patience in answering our questions. We've got more. Does this come back to us again?
I think this was the second time. Was it the second time? This is in August. Yeah, so.
No. If there's any way it could come back to us again, we really appreciate it. It's because you're so good at what you do.
Can it go back as an update rather than a review?
Sure.
Is that?
Would be very functional.